And it occurred to me one day that the perfect person to take over the company was Kathy. It's just such a perfect fit.
Our stocks are down and every Disney movie this year has failed. Look, I don't want to have to say it, but I think the problem is Kathleen Kennedy.
Welcome back, everyone. What a day for Star Wars. Apparently, Kathleen Kennedy is leaving her job as the head of Star Wars at the end of this year. I almost didn't believe it because there have been so many people speculating about her leaving or quitting or being fired over the last several years that I just stopped paying attention to it all at a certain point, because every time people would say stuff like that, you'd hear about her renewing her contract with Disney and re-upping for a couple more years. But apparently now it is really happening, and she will be gone at the end of this year. Most of us that saw the news last night are still doing double takes, like, are you absolutely sure that this is real? This raises a ton of questions about the future of Star Wars. Who's going to take her job, running everything? Will that person be able to fix all the things that seem like they've gone wrong with the brand since Disney bought them back in 2012? So we'll break it all down because I think they've already answered some of those big questions. If you're brand new to the channel, we're getting Andor episodes later this year. I'll be doing videos for those week to week. Also, we have The Mandalorian and Grogu coming next year and Ahsoka Season 2. There are a couple things that we know Star Wars is going to be releasing the next couple of years. But regardless of how you feel about her, Star Wars has probably been one of the most mismanaged brands at Disney since they bought Lucasfilm from George Lucas back in 2012. Typically, people that support her will point to the box office grosses that even though there were a lot of disappointments with the sequel trilogy, people hope that they retcon those movies or just pretend like they never existed. The way that Disney does their Hollywood accounting, if you've ever heard that term, Hollywood accounting, they've still made over $2.5 billion of profit on the movies that they have released so far. But if you look at the history of Star Wars under Disney since 2012, a really good comparison to make would be Marvel after Disney bought them in 2009. Disney has since made $13.2 billion of pure profit from Marvel. Now that's after all the expenses, and that includes all the consumer experiences. This is what they call like the theme parks, all the merchandise, all the stuff beyond the actual movies and TV shows that they can make money on. Which actually represents a much bigger pie of the way that Disney makes money than the actual movies themselves. Like the movies themselves are a relatively tiny portion of Disney's actual profits. When you look at Star Wars, though, since Disney bought them, they've only earned about $5 billion of profit, way less than you would normally expect them to have wanted to make money. And that also includes all the Star Wars merchandise, the theme park stuff, like I said. And anybody who's been a fan of Star Wars since the original trilogy will know that typically they make an order of magnitude more money on the merchandise than they do on the actual Star Wars movies themselves. In fact, when George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Star Wars for $4 billion, they'd essentially become a licensing operation by that point. Like, he wasn't planning on making more movies. Even though he had wrote a treatment for his next Star Wars sequel trilogy, the idea is that he wasn't planning on actually making that. He wanted Disney to make those movies. And I think a couple of the big reasons why she stayed at Disney and Star Wars longer than people expected her to is because of the chaos caused by the pandemic in 2020 and the launch of Disney Plus, with Disney really relying on them hardcore to actually turn a profit. Rewind back to 2019 with the Mandalorian series, Grogu, the launch of Disney Plus. That was viewed as a massive success. I think that was the first point where she looked at Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, and Disney looked at them too and said, oh, these guys seem like they know what they're doing, and they're super successful. Everybody loves these new characters. They might actually be legit candidates for successors to Kathleen Kennedy, who's at a very spotty tenure at Star Wars so far. Typically, when there's chaos like that behind the scenes and you're being paid that much money and you don't deliver the way they want you to deliver, you either get fired or you get politely asked to leave. But when the pandemic happened and The Mandalorian seemed like such a huge success, Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni seemed like they could do no wrong. Part of the issue, I think, is that Disney was looking at Dave Filoni as one of the successors to George Lucas, like he's a bit of a surrogate son to George Lucas. And at least at the time, he had no experience running a live-action TV show or movie business. He was more of an animation guy. So I think the Disney overlords thought that he just was not ready for a big job like that, running all the future of the movies and the TV shows, all of the live-action stuff. This is why the last couple years you probably remember hearing about him being promoted to become the Kevin Feige of Star Wars, essentially, at least on a creative level. He doesn't have total business oversight on all things Star Wars, just creative oversight on the movies and the TV shows. And through the last couple of years of them doing the live-action TV shows, some of them Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau have been involved with. Not all the TV shows, not all the movies. They've just been doing the Mando part of the timeline. So like they weren't involved with the Acolyte, for example. Like they had no hand in that at all. They obviously had no hand in the recent Indiana Jones movie that just got released. I think that Kathleen Kennedy and the Disney people were basically using these last couple of years with him with a little more creative oversight, using it as a sort of trial run to get him ready to be in a more creative oversight position. Give him some of the training that he needed to actually run a big business like this with a probable partner, because what I think, my early theory, conspiracy theory, is that they're going to pull a DC Studios, Disney with Star Wars, the way that Warner Brothers did with DC when they hired James Gunn and his producing partner Peter Safran to co-run the brand. So eventually, unless something really, really wrong happens with Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, or somebody else that they might bring on, is that Dave Filoni will just have creative oversight in a more complete way going forward, and the Disney overlords will just split the responsibilities and hire another executive to do the paperwork business side of running Star Wars, like the administrative side of things that doesn't involve any kind of creative work. All because, remember, the important thing with Star Wars to Disney, like this is just Disney, not talking about the fans, is that Disney makes way more money on the merchandise, the stuff outside of the movies and the TV shows, but the whole idea is that the movies and the TV shows are meant to drive interest in all that other stuff that they earn way more money on. But one of the reasons why I think that Kathleen Kennedy waited until this year to apparently leave is because her contract right now ends at the end of this year. And I think she either just chose not to re-up it or she wasn't able to re-up it. Disney asked her to leave politely in very forceful language, like leave or there will be blood. I would not put it past Disney to do something like that. Like you take your bags of money and you leave. The whole thing with the future of Star Wars, though, is that what's going to happen after the Mando part of the timeline has run its course. Like, they have the Mandalorian and Grogu movie that they're bringing back next year. I think also the idea that Kathleen Kennedy is leaving so that next year Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni will either take all the credit or all the blame if things do not go well with the Mandalorian and Grogu movie. I think they'll probably go fine, though. Dave Filoni also has his Thrawn movie. That's also probably going to be a trial run. I would not be surprised if Disney gives them sort of temporary positions, kind of running the brand, and then just use the next couple of movies that they try to release. And if things go well the next couple of years with all the upcoming movies that they're planning right now and the other TV shows, then they will give him a longer contract and you'll see more of Dave Filoni actually running the brand. I don't know if Jon Favreau is going to sign up for a job this big, but if James Gunn literally just did it at DC, I wouldn't put it past Jon Favreau to also sign up for something like this. A lot of people also forget that Jon Favreau helped build the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, he's already built a cinematic universe. He's credited with a lot of what they did during Marvel Phase 1. That's why he also gets executive producer credits on all the big Avengers movies like Avengers Endgame. Even though he didn't work on Endgame, he still gets the credit because he was such a big part of the early days and all the creative that helped build everything that came after. So he's already got a pretty solid track record there. I also think that's what helped Dave Filoni's chances for being elevated early on too, is because he was paired with someone who did have the experience running a giant movie business. But the whole difference between them and, say, someone like Kathleen Kennedy, even though she's been producing with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg since back in the Indiana Jones days, is that they're so much more tied to the actual creative side and the actual making of these things rather than the administrative side of just producing these things. They're not like glorified accountants that just happen to be running an office trying to keep it on budget. They're actual creatives that have an idea of where these things should go and what they should be doing. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people out there that do not like Dave Filoni's stance on Star Wars and how nostalgic he gets with stuff trying to bring all this stuff back, all the cameo-related stuff. Generally, though, I feel like Jon Favreau, would be a huge step up from Kathleen Kennedy or anybody that they would want to pair with Dave Filoni, someone with more experience actually running the administrative side of things. Just in terms of the actual future of the brand, like when we're talking about looking forward like the next 30 years of Star Wars, they do currently have Simon Kinberg working on the next trilogy like episode 10, 11, and 12, but that's somebody that Kathleen Kennedy hired. The good news there is that he was hired under Dave Filoni's watch after he'd taken creative oversight of Star Wars, so he's actually been able to help him while he's working on that, but it'll probably be years before any of that stuff is cooked enough before they can actually start announcing big things. There's been a lot of rumors about them working on more live-action stuff that they haven't announced yet. I wouldn't be surprised by that, and I think it's a smart move on Star Wars' part just in general to wait until you actually start filming something before you announce it. We don't want another Disney Plus Day debacle to go down. That was more of a Bob Iger edict meant to pump up their stock. Just look at all the stuff we're releasing. TV shows, movies, Marvel, Star Wars. We're gonna make so much money. Don't you want to buy Disney stock now? Cut to a couple years later, most of it either went horribly or didn't wind up getting made at all or got canceled. Whether or not Dave Filoni actually winds up being the person to take creative oversight or Jon Favreau works with him or they pair somebody else with them, I think it would be best if they use Star Wars Episode 10 as a sort of soft creative reboot for brand new characters and ideas, and they don't try to bring back a ton of sequel trilogy characters. Like, just use it as a fresh start. You don't actually have to reboot Star Wars completely, like not a hard reboot. You can bring back a slightly older Grogu, some Force Ghost cameo scenes from the classic movies, but generally I think whatever next trilogy winds up happening just needs to be a completely new jumping off point with completely new characters and ideas and new villains. Do not bring back the Empire for like the 1000th time, do not do another Death Star, and do not let Palpatine somehow return again. There's also a lot of cynics out there that will point to the Star Wars theme parks that Disney has already spent hundreds of millions of dollars developing and how they want to continue to support the characters and things that they develop for those. And remember, consumer experiences represents a much bigger pie of the actual profits that they make. So they want to make more money on that. In order to do that, they would need to support it more in the live action TV shows and movies. Hopefully that will not be the case. Like Disney, do not choose the path of the dark side. It will not end well. Do not be afraid to introduce completely new things. But a really good example of how they continue going back to the classic stuff is they're just introducing Luke Skywalker, the younger version of Luke Skywalker during the Mandalorian part of the timeline, to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. And usually that's a pretty big sign that they mean to continue supporting a lot of the legacy classic stuff. They're introducing it in all the theme parks all of a sudden. Even though there are still a couple ideas that they haven't done during the original trilogy part of the timeline, the prequel part of the timeline, like they haven't done a Vader TV show yet, even though they did a lot of him during Obi-Wan Kenobi, I just feel like they need to look to other completely different characters, completely new ideas. Everybody let me know in the comments, what do you want them to do with the future of Star Wars now that Kathleen Kennedy is leaving? Whoever winds up taking over after her has a really, really big job ahead of them, completely cleaning up the brand. Like I said though, Andor Season 2 episodes will be the only new Star Wars live-action thing this year. I'll do videos when we start getting more trailers for that. Next year is the Mandalorian and Grogu movie and Ahsoka Season 2. And after that, there's supposed to be a couple unannounced live-action TV shows that we probably won't hear about till like right when they start to actually film them. All you have to do, Dave Filoni, is make a banger Cal Kestis TV show and all will be forgiven. We will see what winds up happening with that and what their next movie is after The Mandalorian and Grogu. Either it's going to be Dave Filoni's Thrawn movie or it's going to be something later in the timeline during the New Jedi Order. We will see which winds up sticking, which winds up happening first. Everybody click here for my new Andor Season 2 trailer and click here for that Mandalorian and Grogu trailer video. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you guys in the next one.